I could have you take your seats so we can go to our next session, please. Please grab a chair and let's get rolling. If you could please take your seats now so we can try to get back on time. I have better fine motor skills than I do. All right, if I could have your attention, we're going to get rolling. Good morning. Good morning. What a great response in the front. Good morning. My name is Madeline Kellner, and I'm going to be moderating this next session, which is now that you're on the other side of the dais, now what do you do? So this will be a great intro for really the next couple days and the topics that you're going to be going over. Again, my name is Madeline Kellner, and I'm going to introduce my colleague, Stephanie Moulton-Peters, who is a council member from Mill Valley. She was elected to the City Council in November of 2007. She currently is serving her second term. She served as mayor in 2010 and just this last year in 2014. She is a Mill Valley Council representative to the Transportation Authority of Marin. She also represents the county on the boards of the Marin Transit District, the Sonoma-Marin Area Rail Transit. She is currently the president of the Marin County Council of Mayors and Council Members, and she's a member of the League of California Cities North Bay Division Executive Board, and also serves on the League's Transportation, Communication, and Public Works Policy Committee. And I'll introduce myself. I was elected to the Novato City Council in November 2007, so we were both elected at the same time, so we're buddies in Marin. I'm currently serving my second term. I served as mayor in 2011. I also serve on the Transportation Authority of Marin, the Marin Transit District Board, and the Sonoma-Marin Area Rail Transit Board. I'm a member of the North Bay Division of the League, and I'm also a newly appointed at-large member of the League Board of Directors and serve as the first vice president of the department that puts on this session, which is the Mayor's and Council Members Department. And I also chair the Employee Relations Policy Committee, which is going to be meeting tomorrow. So that's a little bit about our background. So we've been at this 7 years. And before I begin, I just wanted to do a few housekeeping issues here. I've noticed as the years go by that we don't have as much paper, right? All you got was just your agenda. So all the materials are online. We submitted ahead of time an outline so that we're today going to going through a PowerPoint, but there'll be a little bit more detail in that outline. We also encourage you to fill out your evaluations as you go along. That way we get that feedback, which is really helpful when we plan the meetings. What we're going to do is we're going to share the presentation today. We're going to go back and forth. We'd really prefer if we could do the questions at the end, so we will allow time at the end for you to do questions. And then just from a wayfinding standpoint, after this session, we will be going to lunch, and it's in Regency ABC, which I think is next door. So just to kind of ground you. So with that, I'm going to start the presentation. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over really the basics for new council members, and also we'll be framing the issues for the whole conference. So this is kind of the review course that we're going to be going over. We're going to talk about council member roles and responsibilities, talking about the roles and responsibilities of city staff, talking about engaging with your community and not only in public meetings but beyond public meetings, brief review of ethics and ethics and codes of conduct, and then lastly, what kind of resources are available to you from the League of Cities. And we're we're using technology here that requires you to put your cursor exactly on a little blue dot, and for anybody who's over 40, you might know what challenge that might be. So really, this is what it might feel to you, maybe not so much today, but when you're back in your city, there's just so many things to juggle and to keep track of. So hopefully today we'll be able to put a path through that. So we divided up our presentation really into 3 different buckets. The first one I'm going to focus on is the City Council, then we're going to talk about the role of city staff, and then the community, because it's really that Venn diagram that is the world that we live in as city officials. So I think each of us has gone through the experience of campaigning. And, you know, that's kind of one of the jobs. And then when you get in and you're a council member, you think, whoa, now what do I do? It's a totally different role. It requires a different approach, and sometimes it's a little hard to switch gears. And I may be kind of preaching to the choir here today in that many of you just went through that experience. With campaigning, you're really focusing on your own views of what you think is best for your city. It really gives you an opportunity when you're walking precincts and talking to people to really get the pulse of what your community wants for their city. And it also allows you to find how you might be different than another candidate who's running and how you, maybe not to use a great word, but how you can exploit that. And then lastly, it's an individual effort. As contrasted with your role as a city council member, where you really are making policy decisions as an entire council. In other words, the council is really the authority, not the individual members. And that you really need to work to understand not only the issues yourself, but your colleagues' views and really what the purpose is of the decision that you're going to make. And often that isn't something that you're going to do where you're always going to get your own way. It's going to require compromise and really seeking a way to bring all the interests together for a solution. You know, the first thing that I think I would say for all of us is that we really have to do our homework. And I served as a planning commissioner for 4 years, and, you know, the reams of paper we got. But you really have to do your homework, because if you don't, it really does, you're not really serving your community well. So I mentioned as a planning commissioner the documents you have, whereas as a city council member, there are so many things to keep track of, whether your city has a strategic plan, whether you have a general plan, or of course you have to have a general plan. There's so many things that you could be reviewing to really ground yourself in your city. It's also important to understand a bit about your city's organization, staff, the roles, and I think it's also a good idea if you can set up, if someone hasn't done it for you, set up an orientation so you get around and you meet with each of the department heads. If it's possible, go on a ride-along with the police. Go to the corp yard. Just get a feel for what your people are doing in your city and how they're serving your community. And this is something we'll talk about a little bit later, but really your city manager, and many, I think today we have a number of city managers in the room with council members and mayors, but your city manager really is your go-to person. When you have concerns, when you don't understand something, really use your city manager as a resource. You know, one of the things that I've noticed is that each council does have its own culture. I've been living in my own council culture for 7 years, but it's always interesting when I come to these meetings, when I go to other events in Marin and in our division, just how different each council is. And I think it takes a little while to figure that out. And it's really a matter of getting a bit immersed to understand, you know, what the history is. You know, when we come in, there have been people who've been on there for a while. Just, you know, more the thing about seek to understand before you want to be understood, I think is a good way to go. You know, I think we have down here 3 votes. Some of you may come from cities where there are 7 council members or 9 council members. One of the things that you know, many of you have experience in business and running agencies, and you have a lot of very deep experience. But the thing that might be new for you is this idea that to make a decision, you really have to figure out how to count to 3 or 5 or whatever that number is. And that, again, goes back to what I said earlier about compromise, about really seeking to understand what the different interests are and seeing if you can really come up with something that you can get a vote on and get the policy to move forward. Does this segue? All right, we're going to change gears here.
Okay, Madeline, just look for that little blue arrow. Good morning, everybody. So let's take a deeper dive right now into the roles and responsibilities of the City Council, and we're going to keep it on a kind of a high level, but of course one of your major responsibilities is public policy decision-making. And the slide here talks about the success factors of successful public policy. You need to have goals that are clearly defined at the outset of what you're trying to achieve. You want to ask what are the actions that the City Council can take that are in the best interest of the city to address this policy issue. Are the residents and stakeholders involved appropriately? I think all of us know, and particularly those of you who have just finished campaigning, that involving your residents early in the process is crucial to a good outcome. And then finally, for you, has adequate information, analysis, have recommendations and alternatives been provided, and have you heard different points of view so that you can render a decision? All critical factors. Your next role is a quasi-judicial role. This is where you sit acting as a judge, and it applies to planning appeals that may be brought before your council, as well as settling neighborhood disputes and other disputes. The decisions you make are, as a judge, based on the facts and testimony presented to you. And so when you're on the dais, you will be presented with a set of facts and public testimony. If you happen to talk to individuals outside of the hearing, or you visit a project, it's important to bring that up so that the other council members will have the benefit of what you heard and what you saw on visits outside of the hearing. And then finally, you don't want to make your decision or say how you're going to vote in advance of hearing all the public testimony. And I think we all go in with our notion of how we might vote, but I can say from experience, it really isn't until the last person has made their comments and you size it all up. Oftentimes that's when you know where you really land on the decision. So keep your thoughts to yourself going into it, and then deliberate enthusiastically after you've heard the testimony. Your next role, and there's 3 slides on this, and I think it underscores how crucial it is, city budgets and financial oversight. And for those of you coming in from the private sector, as I did, the accounting principles for public agencies are different than the private sector in some ways, and they're alike in others. So it's important to get to understand public sector accounting and finances. Your general funds and your restricted funds are key in keeping the city solvent. You'll hear more about that during today's workshop. Many cities, most, have a 2-year budgeting process, and that's a good way to go. So you're looking out into the future a bit and truing it up after the first year. And so knowing how cost and revenue is managed is important in establishing priorities for the city. And this depends on the services that your city is supplying. So let's go to the next fund. And we're just going to take a deeper dive into services, just a little, to give you a framework of how to think about budget items, priorities, and services. You have your core services, which clearly are emergency services, maintenance, and projects and programs vital to a city's operation. Beyond that, there are important services, facilities, and services that the city should provide as part of serving the business interests and the needs of residents. And this is largely your planning department, building, and public works. And then, depending on how your city holds library and recreation and other services you may provide, they either end up in the important services or the discretionary services bucket. As a financial trustee of the city's resources, the questions to ask yourself are the city's funds being spent appropriately and aligned with future funding priorities? You want to follow up annually. Things change, and you want to test the progress towards goals. And then are audits performed annually? Each city has an annual audit of spending. It's done by a third-party accounting company generally. And so it's important that that be done and that you're aware of the audit results. A next large responsibility the council has is supervision of the city manager. Most cities in California have the council city manager form of government. The council is the policy-making group. The city manager runs the day-to-day operations. The council does not. And I have to hold myself back sometimes, too, because I'd like to run our operations a certain way, but that's not my job. My job is to express my desires and wants to the city manager, as do my council colleagues, and then the city manager takes it and runs with it. Providing clear goals and expectations is pretty straightforward. It's a must. Maintaining effective communications, even when you disagree. Reviewing, enabling city manager to perform efficiently. In the last 5 years, cities have gone through very difficult economic times. I don't need to tell you that, but positions were not filled. There were furloughs, all kinds of things. So as we set out this list of expectations, we have to make sure that the city manager and staff are resourced to accomplish that. And then finally, it's always a good practice to review performance goals annually. I learned through a league conference last fall that a lot of cities don't do this, but honestly, the only way to make sure you're all on track is to look at your goals each year with the city manager and see where you are. Okay, so understanding the city's policies and assuring compliance, that's another one of your key responsibilities, and the places where these policies are kept, you probably have city council policies. You may have missions, goals, and priority projects. Your municipal code obviously is a major policy document and implementation. Your general plan and your city budget sets out the priorities. Okay, I think it's back to you.
So now we're going to focus on the city staff and the role that they play. First up is the city manager. As Stephanie noted, the city manager is responsible for day-to-day operation, really the CEO of the enterprise. The city manager is also the source, probably the primary source of information for us as council members, and it's really important to have regular meetings with your city manager, one-on-one meetings, and also to have mechanisms either through weekly email or some way so that each of you on that council is kept apprised of what's going on. The other role of the city manager as the CEO of the enterprise is to delegate responsibilities for carrying out the different policies that are set by the council, whether that's the Public Works Department, the city clerk, all the different key departments. And then it really depends, again, as we said earlier about culture, how your city wants to do it. But in many cases, the city manager might say, if you have a lot of questions about the public works or about some issue, follow up with the public works director, or it may be through the city manager that happens. So really be respectful of however your city manager wants to do that. But really, the department heads are a good source for more detailed information. And as I just noted, city staff are really the content experts, and I would encourage you, there are times when something comes up on the council agenda where you might be inclined to go talk to every other city and people that you know in other towns, but it's really a good idea when you have a question about something on your agenda to go to your local subject matter expert, which is your department heads, and get their information first. All right, this is the city attorney. Some of you may have contract attorneys. We do in our town, also Mill Valley. Some of you may have staff attorneys. They are really a critical player in helping around contractual issues, legal issues of policy. Also, Brown Act, some of the things that were mentioned earlier about the FPPC, any conflicts of interest, they really are your go-to. Really critical. And they're also very helpful in meetings, you know, when you're not sure with the parliamentary procedure or when you're perhaps presiding over a meeting, they can often help you as an expert on how to carry out some of the challenges that you might have. And they're also good when you have public comment, you know, that they're able to really, you know, help guide in terms of that as well. That little blue arrow is so critical. All right. So really, to put this all together, to have a successful city really requires council members and city staff to work in an effective way. And this really doesn't happen by chance. There really are some good practices that will help carry that out. One of the things that we do in our city is we hold a annual planning retreat. We actually do a strategic plan that's over several years, but then each year we review it, we update it so that it is current. And obviously that's a public meeting. Public can come, weigh in, even, you know, provide input on other things that we should be doing. Clearly in that conversation, we're looking at our budget, we're looking at our resources, and we're looking at what might have changed in the community that really should have us change what our goals and priorities are. I think this is you. Segue.
So just a minute on sort of interpersonal relations, the soft side of the city council organization and the city manager organization. You know, as with most teams, you're only as good as your weakest link, and the more the team is coordinated and working together, the better your outcome will be. And sometimes we come to our job with different points of view, and that's healthy and a good thing. That's a democracy, and that's what we want. The trick is how do we coalesce on central focus in order to go forward. So I like to say, you know, it's important to get to know each other as people outside of the council setting and just develop some sort of rapport. You hear this that it's not happening on the national level anymore, that nobody is talking to each other across the aisle, and it's made it very difficult for them to come together. One of the things that I love about working in local government is this is the level of government that works really well. It is the level closest to the community, and it is where we still have our relationships pretty much intact. So just a thought as you go into your planning retreats. Some of you may have done this in your work lives, but do a Myers-Briggs or some other diagnostic test about your decision-making style or your personality style, but get to understand that you're coming from different directions. And my motto is always seek to understand and then be understood. Listen to what your colleagues are saying and find a way to work towards the middle. So why this is important, the job of making policy decisions and governing is challenging enough as it is. The issues are complex, they're multi-year, and they're multifaceted. So having better relations on the council gets you through the process of resolving issues more quickly. I encountered a situation on my council where we were having some difficulties, and honestly, it took us twice the time to do half the amount of work because of it. We just spent an awful lot of time bumping heads, and it would have been better if we could have gotten through things more quickly for our community. So when it's not working, talk to your city manager about what can be done. Okay, back to you.
All right. So a lot of this is something you've probably already experienced, but just to give a brief review, there are a lot of laws that regulate how we are transparent to our communities and how we make sure that they know what's going on. One of those is that we post our agendas 72 hours in advance. Each of us gets our packets. Our meetings are on Tuesdays. We always get our packets on Thursdays. You know, it gives you a little time over the weekend to review. And the staff reports are usually quite extensive. And by looking at those reports over the weekend, our meetings are on Tuesdays, so if I'm spending my Sunday, then Monday, you know, I can call the staff and say, hey, I don't understand this, or what about that, and it gives them enough time to really get back to not only me, but usually when I ask a question, then that information goes to all the council members, so everybody has the benefit of that information. As we mentioned earlier, read the materials. Any way you can not embarrass staff and allow them to do the research before the meeting, that really, really is helpful. And the other thing is to spend the time before the meeting talking to people, your neighbors, talking to people that you think are going to be impacted by the decision that you're going to make, and get input so that you can have that in the mix the night of the meeting. This is usually the process that most of us use. You get a staff presentation, you go through on the dais, asking clarifying questions, then you bring the public, have the public comment period, then you deliberate, perhaps ask a few more questions, and then take the vote. And after that vote, we've all been part of it where maybe we haven't gotten our way, but you know, you voted, you made a decision, and you move on and you support the decision. The main thing I want to point out on this one is that sometimes, you know, when staff make presentations, you may have a question about it or you may have an issue. I think the whole idea here is to really respect your staff and to ask your questions in a way that is that honors them, but still allows them to be able to explain, and allow them a way that if they can't provide that information then to be able to get back to you in a timely way. And also, this one comment here about staff to correct inaccurate statements. This is under staff presentations, but I really see that happen a lot when we have public comment and you have people coming up to the dais and they're saying this and they're saying that. And what we do, a practice that we use in our council, is after the public comment period, we will turn to our city manager and we'll say, can you please respond to a couple of these items? And then that allows him to respond and say, well, this is actually what's going on with that. That way, our meetings have been televised for many, many years. And, you know, it isn't just the people in the audience, it's the people also on the TV. It's really a good way to be able to educate the public so they don't think that somehow that's the truth. All right, I think we're going to have a chance, if any of you are going to the Circo tomorrow, to actually get to participate in this personally, or at least to watch, and that is the whole public comment period. This really is an important part of our democracy, important part of what we do. And I think all of us have an open time at the very beginning where we do public comment on items not on the agenda, and then clearly public comment on each item that's on the agenda. But you really need to think about how you manage this process. A few years ago, we were going through our housing element, and it was quite a very contentious period of time in our city's history. And we had to really think about how do we manage that? How do we, you know, if we even had more people than would fit in our room, we had to televise. We had to think about, you know, getting people's comment cards ahead of time. You know, helping people think about, well, if they're from a certain group and we don't have enough time for everyone, can we hear from maybe one or two people from that group? So you really have to look at this kind of on a case-by-case basis. Normally in our city, 3 minutes, but there have been some times when we've really been pushed where we've said everyone's going to get 2 minutes, and we're upfront about that at the beginning, so it's not like one person gets 3, and this is something that I think you'll talk about tomorrow during the El Circo. And then one very important point is this last one, where let's say you have someone making a public comment and they end up, you don't want to have a conversation. That's not the point. What you do, and if you're presiding over the meeting, you focus, you get the question, and then you kind of keep a little tally so that after the public comment, you can turn to the city manager, to the applicant, to whoever is the right person for them to be able to answer the question. This is really all about not only civil discourse with our community, but with each other. And, as I said, we have been televised for years. When I was on the Planning Commission, we were televised. So you just got to figure everything you're doing up there, you're sending a message. And I think, there are ways to have a deliberative process that's respectful. It doesn't mean you have to be a yes person or any of that. But it's really important to use a lot of what many of us have used, if any of you have been in labor negotiations, to really understand interests and to really try to get at, when you're dealing with your colleague, what is their real interest? What is it that they're really concerned about? Or when that person comes up, to the podium and they, really trying to figure out what those interests are so that you can weigh those when you make your decision. And I think this is something you've all learned by now about the, needing the council majority. Back to my 3 out of 5 or 5 out of 7 or whatever your numbers are. Once you've made a decision, I think it's useful. If people want to know kind of what your perspective was, I think that's fine to share that. But I think really what you need to do as a city is you need to move forward. You say, we made this decision, we're going to figure out how to make it work, and you move on. And don't keep the debate, because it really just doesn't allow your community to move forward. All right, we're going to segue.
So I just want to say a couple words about engaging with the community outside of the public hearing. Again, if you've just been campaigning, you've been doing that in spades. It's important to continue it. Sometimes I have found that I'm overloaded with council work and other commissions that I serve on, and so getting out, it's tough because of time pressures, but you want to keep doing it. We do have difficult decisions that we're making in California these days, and we need to continue to cultivate the trust of our constituents to work with us, to know that we hear them and we've heard what their needs are and that we're taking it into consideration as we grapple with some tough issues. So these are conversations that can happen in study sessions, neighborhood meetings, and one-on-one conversations. And the one caution is, again, don't divulge your vote on future issues. That really compromises your position. Some other suggestions for behavior outside of the Council Act is be mindful of the Brown Act, and you'll hear much more about that later today. Decide as a council how you want to interface with the media and do letters to the editor. In my town, the mayor is the official spokesperson for the council and is the primary media contact. And we find that just keeps things organized and orderly, but different cities do it different ways. Always be conscious you're the face of the city, as Madeline was saying. Whether you're being broadcast on the TV or live in public, we want to model the kind of behavior and discourse that we want to see in our chambers. Support your council decisions and involve and engage the city manager as appropriate. So I'm just going to touch now on ethics standards, which we are all required to meet, and I would say this is also part of the ongoing relationship with our constituents. This kind of transparency, whether it's the Form 700, which is your state of economic interest that you complete every year by April 1st, and you'll hear more about that. You can do it online, but that's an annual requirement. AB 1234, ethics training, many of you will be taking that here at the conference, and then every 2 years you get a refresher. And then finally, the ever-famous Brown Act, which really is all about open government and about noticing an agenda so the public is aware of what we're doing, and about limiting our conversations with our fellow council members outside of the public hearings.
All right, So that's the formal part of our presentation. We just included here some resources. There's so much out there to help guide you. The League, also the Institute for Local Government, it has some amazing documents. I would highly recommend you go on their site and look at them. They're succinct. They're, you know, things about dealing with public engagement, how to run a meeting, a lot of really great basic stuff, not only for you as council members, but also for some of your commissions. And we noted some of the documents there. So we're going to stop the formal part of our presentation now and open it up to questions. By the way, our contact information was on the end of that end of the presentation. We also have cards here should you want to follow up with us later. But I think what we're going to do now is we're going to take questions, and the best way for us